April 1945, southern Germany. A woman walked out of the trees carrying a white flag made from a bedsheet tied to a broomstick. She was wearing a nurse's uniform. German. Red cross on her sleeve. No weapon. Hands visible. She walked directly toward an American checkpoint. 50 armed soldiers watching her through rifle sights, and she said 7 words that no one was prepared for. "I can save your dying soldier." The Americans had a man in the aid tent who'd been hit that morning. Sergeant Paul Keegan, 26, from Philadelphia. Shrapnel had torn through his abdomen. The company medic had done what he could, but Keegan was bleeding internally, and the nearest surgical unit was 4 hours away by jeep on roads that might be mined. Keegan had maybe 2 hours. Everyone knew it. The medic had already said the words nobody wanted to hear. "I can't fix this. He needs a surgeon." And now a German woman was standing at the wire, claiming she could do what their own medic couldn't. The question wasn't whether she was telling the truth. The question was whether they could trust her. Within an hour, the company was tearing itself apart. Half said let her in, she might be their only chance. The other half said she could be a spy, a saboteur, or something worse, a woman who'd use a scalpel on an unconscious American soldier and finish what the shrapnel started. The argument went up the chain fast. By nightfall, it was on Patton's desk, and what Patton said when he arrived silenced every man in the room. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the stories about World War II that put you inside decisions where trust and survival collide, and there's no safe answer. The unit was Baker Company, 2nd Battalion, 328th Infantry Regiment, 26th Infantry Division. They were pushing through Bavaria in the final weeks of the war, clearing towns, taking surrenders, and trying not to get killed in a conflict that everyone knew was almost over. That was the cruelest part, dying in a war that was weeks from ending. Every soldier felt it. Every step forward carried the unspoken prayer. Not me, not now, not this close to going home. They'd taken the crossroads outside a village called Feldkirch that morning. Light resistance, a few shots from a retreating German rearguard, nothing serious. Except one round caught Sergeant Paul Keegan. Keegan was a lifer, 12 years in the army, 3 combat deployments, the kind of NCO who held a platoon together through sheer competence and stubbornness. He wasn't beloved, he was too demanding for that, but he was respected. The men trusted him because he'd kept them alive through situations that should have killed all of them. This time was different. The shrapnel had gone deep. Keegan was conscious when they carried him to the aid tent, which was almost worse. He could feel what was happening inside him. He knew. "Doc," he said to the company medic, Corporal Jimmy Novak. "How bad?" Novak was 23, a former pharmacy student from Cleveland. He was good, resourceful, calm, quick, but he was a medic, not a surgeon. "You need surgery, Sarge." "How long do I have?" Novak hesitated. In medic training, they taught you never to answer that question, but Keegan wasn't a green private. A couple hours, maybe less if the bleeding picks up. "And the nearest surgeon?" 4 hours, bad roads, might be mined. Keegan closed his eyes. The math was simple. 4 hours of transport for a man with 2 hours of life. "So that's it. I'm gonna do everything I can, Sarge. I know you will, kid." Problem number 1, can she be trusted? That's when the runner came in. "Doc, there's a woman at the perimeter, German, says she's a nurse, says she can help." Her name was Liesel Brandt, 34 years old. She'd been a surgical nurse at the University Hospital in Munich, 7 years of operating room experience, trained by some of the best surgeons in Germany. When the hospital was bombed in 1943, she'd been reassigned to a Wehrmacht field hospital, where she spent 2 years performing emergency surgery because there was no one else left to do it. She'd been hiding in a farmhouse outside Feldkirch for 2 days. She'd heard the Americans setting up their position. Then she'd heard a medic's voice carrying across the quiet afternoon, saying words she understood in any language. "He's not going to make it." She made a decision. She found a bedsheet, tied it to a broomstick, and walked toward the American lines. Lieutenant Frank Corrigan, Baker Company's commander, 27, Boston, former law student, was cautious by nature. He had her searched, no weapons, a faded hospital ED from Munich, and a small leather case containing surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, suture needles, forceps, clean, oiled, maintained with care. Through Private Ackerman, who spoke German, Corrigan asked the only question that mattered. "Why do you want to help us?" Brandt answered in careful, halting English. "Because your soldier is dying. I can hear it from across the camp. Your medic cannot fix this. I can. I have done this surgery many times." "You're a nurse, not a surgeon." She switched to German. Ackerman translated. "In the last 2 years I was both. We had no surgeons. I operated. The patients lived. Most of them." "Most? Surgery is not magic, Lieutenant. People die, but they die more often when nobody tries." Master Sergeant Tom Bukowski, 39, Pittsburgh, 16 months in combat, was against it. Absolutely, flatly, without discussion. You cannot let a German woman operate on an American soldier. She walked out of the woods. We don't know who she is. She could be intelligence. She could kill him on that table. She has surgical instruments, Top. She has training. She says she has training. We have a hospital ID card that could have come from anywhere. The Wehrmacht has used women as operatives before. This could be a sabotage mission. Novak, the medic, was desperate. "Lieutenant, I can't save him. If she can do it, we have to let her try." Bukowski turned on him. "And if she can't? If she's lying? If Keegan dies under a German scalpel? What do I tell his wife?" Problem number 2. Is she actually qualified? Corrigan went to the aid tent. Keegan was grey now, not pale, grey. The colour a man turns when his body begins shutting down. His breathing was shallow. His pulse was thready. "How long, Doc?" Novak looked at him. "An hour, maybe." Corrigan walked back. He stood in front of Brandt and made one last attempt at verification. Described the procedure, exactly, step by step. Brandt spoke through Ackerman. Her voice shifted, clinical, precise, stripped of emotion. The language of someone describing something they'd done dozens of times. Midline laparotomy, incise through the linea alba to avoid major vessels, retract the wound edges, identify the source of hemorrhage, likely small bowel perforation, based on the entry point and his symptoms. Clamp the mesenteric artery feeding the damaged segment, debride the necrotic tissue, close the perforation with interrupted sutures, 2-layer closure, irrigate the peritoneal cavity with saline to reduce infection risk, close the fascia, leave the skin loosely approximated for drainage. She paused. "Your medic should prepare sulfur powder for the cavity, and more morphine. The field anesthesia will not hold through the deepest work. He will wake up." Novak was staring at her, not because he understood every word, his surgical training was basic, but because the way she described it, the sequence, the terminology, the specific detail about leaving the skin loose, that wasn't something you memorized from a textbook. That was something you learned at 3 a.m. in a field hospital with your hands inside someone. "She's real," Novak said to Corrigan. "That's not rehearsed." Corrigan made the call. "Do it." Bukowski's objection was formal, immediate, and on the record. "This is on you, Lieutenant." "Noted. Get me the boiled water." Problem number 3. Will the patient survive? They set up in the aid tent. Brandt washed her hands. 3 full minutes, scrubbing under the nails, between the fingers, up to the elbows. Novak watched her wash and felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Nobody fakes a surgical scrub. The technique is too specific, too practiced. She laid out her instruments on a clean cloth, each one in a specific position, arranged by the order she'd need them. Her hands had stopped shaking. At the checkpoint they'd been trembling. In the command tent they'd been trembling. Now, with instruments in front of her and the patient on the table, they were steady. She picked up the scalpel. 6 soldiers stood outside the tent, listening. The clink of metal on metal. Novak's voice, reading vitals. Brandt's voice, quiet, steady, giving. Instructions in a mix of German and broken English that Novak somehow followed. The language of medicine cut across borders. 15 minutes in, Keegan screamed. Not a word, a sound, raw, involuntary, pain that the morphine couldn't cover. Every soldier outside the tent flinched. Bukowski put his hand on his sidearm and stepped toward the flap. Corrigan blocked him. "Stand down, Top." If she's hurting him, she's operating on him. It's going to hurt. Inside, Brandt didn't flinch. She spoke to Keegan. Soft, calm, German words that none of the Americans understood. Keegan's screaming dropped to moaning. His body relaxed slightly. She kept working. She found the perforation. Small bowel, just as she'd predicted. She clamped, debrided, sutured. Novak watched the stitches go in. Small, even, precise. Better than anything he'd seen from army surgeons working triple speed. Then she hit a problem. A second bleeder. Deeper. A damaged mesenteric vessel that hadn't shown itself until she cleared the primary wound. Blood welled up fast, dark, filling the cavity. Clamp, she said. Her voice was tight, not panicked, focused. Another clamp, now. Novak fumbled through the instrument kit. He found a clamp, handed it over. Brandt's hands moved fast, faster than before, faster than Novak could follow. She isolated the vessel, clamped it, held pressure with one hand while suturing with the other. Keegan's pulse dropped. Novak read it out, his own voice shaking now. Pulse 42, 38, sir, he's crashing. Brandt didn't respond. She was working, suturing, tying off, one hand deep in the cavity, the other pulling thread through tissue with a precision that seemed impossible for the speed. 30 seconds, the longest 30 seconds Novak had ever experienced. Pulse 44, he said. 46, 48, stabilizing. The bleeder was tied off. The cavity was clear. Brandt irrigated, inspected, found no additional damage. She closed in layers. Peritoneum, fascia, skin left loosely approximated just as she described. 52 minutes, start to finish. She stepped back. Keegan's color was returning. Not healthy, but alive. The grey was fading. He will need blood, Brandt said, and antibiotics, at least 3 days, but he will live. Novak checked the vitals, pulse steadying, blood pressure climbing, breathing deeper. You did it, he said. Brandt didn't smile. She walked to the corner of the tent, sat on the ground, and put her head in her hands. She stayed there for a long time. Problem number 4, will command punish them? The report went up the chain that night. Corrigan wrote it himself, detailed, honest, omitting nothing. Division was not happy. The staff judge advocate flagged it immediately. An enemy national had been given unsupervised access to a wounded American soldier, no verification of credentials, no authorization from medical command. The division surgeon was furious. A German nurse operating on our men with field instruments in an aid tent. This is malpractice, a security breach, and an embarrassment. The battalion surgeon, Major David Ellsworth, came down personally. He examined Keegan, reviewed the suture work, checked the notes Novak had kept during the procedure. His face was unreadable. The work is competent, he said. Better than competent. But that doesn't change the fact that this was unauthorized, undocumented, and performed by an unverified foreign national. She saved his life, sir. And if she hadn't, if he died on that table, you'd be court-martialed right now, and the army would be dealing with a scandal. The fact that it worked doesn't make it right, Lieutenant. But Ellsworth added something else to his report, something that complicated the narrative command wanted to build. He wrote, "The surgical technique demonstrated by the German national is consistent with advanced training. Suture work, hemostasis, and wound management exceed the standard I would expect from a field surgeon with comparable resources. Had this procedure been performed by an American medical officer, I would classify it as exemplary." That single paragraph made its way up the chain alongside the disciplinary recommendation. Both documents, the condemnation and the commendation, landed on Patton's desk simultaneously. Problem number 5. What will Patton do? Patton arrived at Baker Company's position the following morning. The Oasis, Jeep, the stars, the pistols. Every soldier in the company had heard he was coming. He went to the aid tent first. Keegan was awake, weak, in pain, but coherent. "Sergeant Keegan." "Sir." Keegan tried to sit up. Patton put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay down. How do you feel?" "Like I got taken apart and put back together, sir." "You did. A German woman did it." Keegan's face changed. He hadn't been told. "German, sir." "A nurse. Walked out of the woods with a white flag, cut you open, fixed 2 bleeders, sewed you back up. Your medic says it was the best field surgery he's ever seen. Keegan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was flat. I don't know how I feel about that, sir. You don't have to know yet. You just have to be alive to figure it out. Patton walked to Brant's tent. She'd been held separately since the surgery, fed, guarded, not mistreated, but not free. She stood when he entered. Sit, Patton said. Ackerman translated. Patton sat across from her and studied her face. You performed surgery on my soldier. Without authorization, without verification, without anyone confirming you are who you say you are. There was no time. He was dying. They also tell me you're good. The battalion surgeon, a man who would rather chew glass than compliment a German, called your work exemplary. Brant said nothing. Why did you do it? Through Ackerman. Because I am a nurse. I was trained to save lives. Not German lives or American lives. Lives. A patient has no nationality. Patton stood and walked outside. Corrigan, Bukowski, Novak, Ellsworth, and half the company were waiting. Here's what I see, Patton said. A German woman risked her life to walk into an American camp. She had no guarantee she wouldn't be shot. She had no obligation to help. She could have stayed hidden and waited out the war. Instead, she saved one of my soldiers. He turned to Bukowski. Sergeant, you objected. On the record, your instinct to protect your men was correct. The security risk was real. An unverified civilian performing surgery, in any normal circumstance, that's a catastrophic breach. Bukowski straightened. But you were also wrong. You let the uniform decide who she was before you let her prove it. An enemy nurse and a real nurse walked through your perimeter at the same time, and you only saw one of them. Patton turned to Corrigan. Lieutenant, you let her in. Against advice, against protocol. That took judgment. You weighed the risk of trusting her against the certainty of losing Keegan. Yes, sir. You were right this time, but let me be clear. You were right because she was genuine. If she'd been a saboteur, if Keegan had died on that table, you'd be in a stockade right now. You gambled. The gamble paid off. Don't confuse luck with policy. Patton addressed the full group. The war is ending. We're going to encounter thousands of German civilians, wounded, sick, displaced. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough medics. We don't have enough of anything. He gestured toward Brant's tent. That woman has 7 years of hospital experience and 2 years of combat surgery. She's more qualified than half the medical officers in this division. Here's the order. She works with our medical team. She treats civilians, German wounded, displaced persons, refugees. If there's a situation where an American soldier needs surgical care and no American surgeon is available, she can operate under supervision with an American medic present. Documented, authorized, on the record. Ellsworth started to speak. Patton cut him off. She saved a man who was going to die. That's her credential. I've seen surgeons with medical degrees who couldn't manage what she did in that tent. Credentials are paper. Results are blood. He walked toward his jeep and stopped. One more thing. I don't want to hear about this again. She works, she treats patients, she earns her keep. If anyone in this company has a problem with the German nurse saving American lives, they can come explain it to me personally. He looked at Keegan's tent one last time. The war taught us who the enemy is. What comes next is harder, figuring out who isn't. He drove away. Problem number 6. What happens when the order meets reality? The order sounded clean. The reality was not. Brant started working with Baker Company's medical team the next day. Within a week, the problems Patton hadn't anticipated or hadn't cared about began multiplying. The first issue was other units. Word traveled fast that Baker Company had a German woman treating soldiers. A captain from a neighboring battalion drove over specifically to see it for himself. He stood in the doorway of the medical tent, watched Brant suture a laceration on a private's forearm, and then went back to his unit and filed a complaint with regiment. The complaint used the word fraternization. It used the word collaboration. It implied that Baker Company had been compromised. Corrigan spent an afternoon writing a response. Bukowski, who still didn't trust Brant, nevertheless told the visiting captain to mind his own business. Not because he'd changed his mind about her, but because an outsider criticizing his company was a different kind of offense. The second issue was the soldiers themselves. Not all of Baker Company accepted Patton's order. Staff Sergeant Mike Haynes, 2nd Platoon, had been one of the men who initially supported letting Brandt operate. But after the surgery, after the adrenaline faded, something soured in him. He couldn't articulate it exactly. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't suspicion, it was something closer to resentment, a feeling that the war's simple moral architecture, us good, them bad, had been violated, and he wasn't ready for whatever replaced it. Haynes stopped going to the medical tent. When he cut his hand on barbed wire 2 weeks later, he walked to the battalion aid station 3 miles away rather than let Brandt touch him. Nobody ordered him to do otherwise. Nobody could. Sergeant Lou DeStefano, 3rd Platoon, was worse. He'd never supported the decision, and Patton's order didn't change his mind. It just made him quieter about it. He referred to Brandt as the German in every conversation, never by name. When she passed him in camp, he looked through her. When other soldiers talked about her surgical skill, DeStefano would say the same thing every time. My brother died at Anzio. A German killed him. I don't care how good she is with a needle. Nobody argued with him. What could you say to that? He was right. His brother was dead. The person who'd killed him spoke the same language as the woman now working in their medical tent. Grief doesn't negotiate with logic. The third issue, the one nobody saw coming, was Brandt herself. She worked. She was efficient, skilled, tireless. She treated German civilians during the day, wounds, infections, dysentery, malnutrition, and was available for American casualties when needed. She performed 2 more surgeries on American soldiers in the following weeks. Both survived. Her reputation grew, but she was not well. Novak noticed it first. Small things. She'd pause mid-procedure, staring at nothing, then snap back. She washed her hands longer and longer before each surgery, 5 minutes, then 7, then 10, scrubbing until her skin was raw and cracked. She ate almost nothing. She slept in 90-minute intervals, waking up gasping, sitting in the dark until dawn. She was breaking, not suddenly, not dramatically. The way a person breaks when they've been holding themselves together for years through sheer willpower, and the willpower finally runs out. The war was ending. The emergency that had kept her moving, kept her focused, kept the fear and exhaustion at bay, that emergency was dissolving. And without it, everything she'd suppressed was flooding in. Novak tried to talk to her about it. The conversation was painful, half English, half German, half silence. You need rest. I am fine. You're not fine. You haven't slept more than 2 hours in a row since you got here. In the field hospital, we did not sleep for days. This is normal. The field hospital is over. The war is almost over. Brandt looked at him. Through Ackerman, she said something that Novak thought about for the rest of his life. The war is almost over for you. For me, it will never be over. Every patient I lost, every child who died because I had no medicine, every soldier I couldn't save, they are all still in the room with me. They will always be in the room with me. Rest does not help with that. Novak didn't know what to say. He was 23. He didn't have the vocabulary for what she was describing, wouldn't have it for decades until the language of trauma caught up with the reality of it. He brought it to Corrigan. Sir, she's not okay. I know. She needs help, real help, not more patience. She's a German civilian in an American military camp. Who exactly am I supposed to send her to? We don't have psychiatrists for our own men, let alone for her. It was true. Combat exhaustion, what later generations would call PTSD, was barely acknowledged in 1945, and certainly not treated with anything resembling adequate care. American soldiers who broke were sent to rear area hospitals, sedated, sometimes given limited counseling. A German nurse working under a general's informal order had no access to any of that, so Brandt kept working, and the cracks kept spreading, and Novak watched, and Corrigan watched, and nobody knew what to do. The fourth problem arrived on the 8th day. A jeep came in carrying 2 wounded soldiers from a patrol, a private with a shattered knee and a corporal with a deep shrapnel wound in his shoulder. Novak triaged them. The knee was painful but manageable. The shoulder was serious. The shrapnel had nicked the subclavian artery and the corporal was losing blood fast. Novak couldn't repair an arterial bleed. He looked at Brandt. Can you do this? She looked at the wound. She nodded, but the corporal was conscious and he could see her. Who the hell is she? She's a surgical nurse. She's German. I can see the uniform. No, get her away from me. Corporal, you're bleeding. She's the only one who can fix this. I said no. I'd rather bleed out than let a German cut on me. The tent went silent. Brandt stood there, instruments in hand, looking at a man who was choosing to die rather than accept her help. Her face was empty. Whatever she felt, she'd locked it away behind the professional mask she'd worn for years. Novak tried again. You're going to lose this arm if she doesn't operate. You might lose your life. Then that's my choice. Corrigan was called. He stood over the corporal. Soldier, I'm ordering you to accept treatment. Sir, you can order me to fight. You can order me to march. You can't order me to let the enemy operate on me. Corrigan looked at Novak. Novak shook his head. The corporal was right. There was no regulation that compelled a conscious patient to accept treatment from a specific provider. They compromised. Novak did what he could. Packed the wound, applied pressure, started fluids. They loaded the corporal onto a jeep and sent him to the battalion aid station, 3 miles of rough road, hoping the artery would hold. It held, barely. The corporal survived, but he lost most of the use of his right arm. A surgeon at the evacuation hospital repaired the artery, but the nerve damage was done. Too much time had passed. The corporal went home to Oregon with a Purple Heart and a right arm that couldn't grip a coffee cup. He never knew, or never admitted, that the damage might have been prevented if he'd let Brandt operate when there was still time. Nobody blamed him. How do you blame a man for not trusting the enemy? But nobody forgot it either. The question hung in the air for days afterward. Was his choice brave or stupid? Was it principle or pride? And did it matter when the result was a 22-year-old who'd never throw a baseball again? Brandt never mentioned it. She went back to treating civilians, but Novak saw something close behind her eyes that day, a door shutting. Another patient she couldn't save, not because she lacked the skill, but because the war had made her the wrong person to save him. The fifth problem was the one that almost unraveled everything. 3 weeks after Brandt arrived, the Army's Criminal Investigation Division sent an investigator, a captain named Whelan, to examine the circumstances of Keegan's surgery. Not because anyone doubted the outcome, but because a formal complaint had been filed. The visiting captain who'd used the word fraternization had friends at division. Whelan was thorough. He interviewed Corrigan, Novak, Bukowski, Ellsworth, and 8 other soldiers. He examined Brandt's ID. He requested and received records from the university hospital in Munich through an intelligence liaison. He spent 2 days at Baker Company, watching Brandt work, asking questions, taking notes. His preliminary finding was uncomfortable. Brandt's hospital ID was authentic, her training was verifiable, her surgical record at the Wehrmacht field hospital was documented, but the field hospital where she'd served, Field Hospital 27, attached to the 12th SS Panzer Division, had been located for 4 months in 1944, adjacent to a labor camp. Not an extermination camp, a labor camp that supplied workers to a munitions factory. Prisoners, mostly Eastern European forced laborers, had been worked under brutal conditions, and some had been treated at the field hospital when they collapsed. Whelan's question was precise. Did Brandt treat forced laborers? Did she witness the conditions? Did she report them? Through Ackerman, Brandt answered. Yes, I treated them. They were brought to me with injuries, broken bones, infections, malnutrition. I treated them the same as any patient. Did you know they were forced laborers? Yes. Did you report the conditions to anyone? A long silence. Then, to whom? My commanding officer ran the hospital. His commanding officer ran the division. The system was the system. I was a nurse in a military hospital during a war. I did not have the power to change what was happening. I had the power to treat the patients in front of me. That is what I did. Whelan wrote it down. He didn't comment. He didn't judge. He added it to his report and left. The report went to division. Division forwarded it to 3rd Army. Patton's staff read it and made a decision that was purely bureaucratic but felt like a verdict. The investigation was closed. No action taken. Brandt's status remained unchanged. But the information leaked, as information always does. Within days, everyone in Baker Company knew that Brandt had worked at a hospital near a labor camp. The facts were precise, but facts don't stay precise when they travel through a company of soldiers. By the time the story reached DeStefano, it had mutated. She'd worked at a concentration camp. She'd treated SS officers. She was complicit. None of that was true. But DeStefano didn't care about precision. He cared about his brother at Anzio and the German woman who represented everything that had taken his brother away. He confronted Brandt outside the medical tent. No violence. DeStefano wasn't that kind of man, just words. Cold, measured, devastating words delivered through Ackerman, who translated with visible discomfort. You worked next to a labor camp. You saw people being worked to death, and you did nothing. You just kept doing your job. That's what Germans do, isn't it? Just follow orders. Just do your job, no matter who suffers. Brandt stood there. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She looked at DeStefano with an expression that carried no anger, no defiance, just a terrible, exhausted recognition that he was partly right and that being partly right was enough. She said one sentence. Ackerman translated it. Yes, I did my job, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. Will that be enough for you? DeStefano didn't answer. He walked away. Nobody resolved it. Nobody could. DeStefano had a dead brother. Brandt had treated forced laborers and not stopped the system that enslaved them. Both things were true. Both things would remain true forever. The war didn't produce clean categories. Hero, villain, innocent, guilty. It produced people who were all of those things simultaneously and then forced them to live next to each other. Patton never came back to Feldkirch. He'd issued his order and moved on. The war consumed his attention, the final push, the surrender, the occupation. One German nurse in one Bavarian village was a problem he'd solved in 20 minutes and never thought about again. But the problem he'd solved kept generating new problems that he never saw. Brandt worked with Baker Company for 6 more weeks. She treated hundreds of civilians and 7 more American soldiers. Every patient she touched survived. Her record was, by any clinical measure, extraordinary, but she was never accepted. Not fully, not by everyone. Novak respected her. He told anyone who asked that she was the best he'd ever worked with. Years later, he went to medical school because of her, because watching her operate had shown him what he wanted to become. Corrigan respected her judgment, but kept his distance. He'd made the call that saved Keegan's life, and he'd make it again. But the weight of that decision, the gamble, as Patton had called it, never fully left him. He woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, imagining the version where she wasn't genuine, where Keegan died, where he faced a court-martial instead of a commendation. The good outcome didn't erase the risk. It just made the risk invisible to everyone except him. Bukowski never changed his mind. Not once. Not after watching her save Keegan. Not after watching her deliver 2 babies and treat a gangrenous leg and perform surgeries that would have been impressive in a fully equipped hospital, let alone a tent in Bavaria. He watched all of it and remained exactly where he'd started. She shouldn't have been let in. The fact that it worked out was luck, not vindication, and building policy on luck was how men died. When asked about it after the war, Bukowski said, "She was a good nurse, maybe a great nurse. That doesn't change the fact that letting an unknown German national operate on a wounded American soldier was a reckless decision. I've seen reckless decisions get people killed. This one didn't. That doesn't make it smart. He wasn't wrong, and nobody could make him be wrong because the logic held. It would always hold. The gap between what actually happened and what could have happened was where Bukowski lived, and he'd never leave it. DeStefano never spoke to Brandt again. He served out the rest of the war, went home to Brooklyn, married his brother's fiancée, a fact that carried its own complicated weight, and worked at the Navy Yard for 30 years. He didn't talk about Germany. He didn't talk about the nurse. When his children asked about the war, he told them about Anzio. That was the only story he had. Keegan recovered. He spent 3 weeks in an evacuation hospital, then was shipped home to Philadelphia. He walked with a hitch in his step for the rest of his life. Scar tissue from the field surgery pulled when he moved. But he walked. He struggled with it. Not the wound, the fact of her. A German woman had saved his life. He'd spent 3 years fighting Germans, hating Germans, watching Germans kill his friends. And now he owed his life to one. The gratitude and the resentment lived in the same place inside him, and they never sorted themselves out. He wrote to Brandt in 1947. The letter took him 2 weeks to compose. He threw away 9 drafts. The final version was short. Dear Nurse Brandt, I'm alive because you walked across a field with a white flag and cut me open in a tent. I didn't know you were German until after. I'll be honest, it bothered me. It still bothers me. I don't know how to thank someone I was taught to hate, but my daughter was born last March. Her name is Liesel. I don't know if that tells you what I can't say. Paul Keegan. He sent it to the town hall in Feldkirch, hoping someone would forward it. Brandt received the letter 5 months later. She was working at a hospital in Munich that was slowly being rebuilt from rubble. She was thinner than she'd been during the war. The work of rebuilding was harder than the work of surviving, because surviving only required endurance, and rebuilding required hope, and hope was something Brandt had very little of. She read the letter 3 times. She folded it, put it in the leather case with her surgical instruments, and kept it there for the rest of her life. She never wrote back. Not because she didn't want to, because she didn't know what to say. What do you write to a man who named his daughter after you, but still can't decide if he's grateful or angry? What language bridges that gap? None. No language bridges it. Some distances are permanent. The war made them, and the peace didn't unmake them, and the people who lived through both learned to carry the weight of things that would never be resolved. Novak visited Munich once, in 1974. He was 52, a surgeon with a practice in Cleveland, a career built on a foundation laid in a tent in Bavaria. He found Brandt's hospital. He asked for her. She'd retired 3 years earlier, arthritis in her hands, the same hands that had saved Keegan, that had delivered babies, that had scrubbed raw every morning for 30 years. They couldn't hold a scalpel anymore. He found her address. He went to her apartment. She opened the door and looked at him for a long moment. The medic, she said in English. Her English had gotten better over the decades. The medic, he confirmed. She invited him in. The apartment was small, clean, spare. On the wall was a single framed photograph, herself, and Novak, standing outside the aid tent in 1945, squinting in the sun. Someone had taken it the day after Keegan's surgery. Novak didn't even remember it being taken. You kept it, he said. It is the only picture I have from those years where I am not standing next to something terrible. They sat and talked for 2 hours. Tea, silence, fragments of memory. Novak told her he'd become a surgeon because of her. She listened without expression. I am glad, she said. Someone should have become something because of that night. I am not sure I did. He asked what she meant. I saved your soldier. I saved many people after that. But I did not save the ones before, the ones at the field hospital, the laborers who came to me broken, and I sent them back to be broken again. I fixed their bones so they could work. I treated their infections so they could survive long enough to keep suffering. I was their nurse, and I was part of the machine that destroyed them. Novak didn't have an answer. He was 52, and he still didn't have the vocabulary. You did what you could. I did what I was allowed to do. That is not the same thing. He left the next morning. They wrote to each other occasionally. Short letters, careful, polite. The warmth was real, but bounded by things neither of them could fully articulate. Brandt died in 1986. She was 75. The leather case with her surgical instruments was on the nightstand. Inside the case, next to the scalpels and clamps, was Keegan's letter. The folds were soft from handling. She'd read it many times. She never wrote back. There is no tidy lesson here. Patton made a pragmatic decision. It worked. It saved lives. It also created problems he never dealt with, because generals make decisions and move on, and the people left behind live with the consequences. Brandt was brave. She was skilled. She was also complicit in a system she couldn't stop and didn't try to stop in any way that history recorded. She saved an American soldier's life and carried the weight of the ones she couldn't save, the ones the system chewed up and spit out while she did her job. Keegan lived because a stranger chose mercy. He named his daughter after that stranger and never fully reconciled the gratitude with the hatred that the war had put inside him. Some things don't reconcile. They just coexist uncomfortably for the rest of a life. Bukowski was never wrong. Corrigan was never sure. De Stefano was never at peace. Novak became a surgeon and spent his career trying to be as good as a German nurse he'd met when he was 23. And the war ended, and the mess it made didn't. Would you have let a German nurse operate on a dying American soldier? Or would you have said the risk was too great? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about World War II and the decisions that never fully resolved, make sure to subscribe.